The grand ballroom of Buckingham Palace buzzed with quiet conversations and the gentle clink of champagne glasses. Prince Charles stood near the towering windows, watching the London evening settle into darkness. His formal military uniform felt heavier than usual tonight, weighted down by the decision that had been consuming his thoughts for weeks. Across the room, Camilla Parker Bowles moved gracefully between groups of guests, her emerald dress catching the light from the crystal chandeliers. She had been his confidant for decades, the woman who understood his passions for architecture and gardening, who shared his love for countryside retreats and intellectual discussions. Their relationship had weathered storms that would have destroyed lesser bonds, but tonight his eyes kept drifting to another figure in the crowd. Catherine Middleton stood with a group of young charity workers, her navy blue dress modest yet elegant. She listened intently to their conversation about children's welfare programs, occasionally asking thoughtful questions that showed genuine interest rather than polite obligation. There was something different about her approach to royal duties, something that reminded Charles of his late mother's early years of service. The evening had been planned as a celebration of the Prince's Trust's latest achievements. Hundreds of young people who had benefited from the charity's programs filled the palace's staterooms, their success stories a testament to what could be accomplished when opportunity met determination. Charles had always felt particularly proud of this organization, seeing it as his most meaningful contribution to the nation. As he moved through the crowd, accepting congratulations and sharing brief conversations, Charles found himself studying the interactions around him. Camilla commanded respect from the older generation of guests, her years of experience evident in how she navigated complex social situations. She knew exactly which topics to raise with which dignitaries, how to deflect uncomfortable questions with humor, and when to gracefully exit conversations that were heading toward controversy. Catherine, however, brought something entirely different to her interactions. When she knelt down to speak with a young girl who had overcome significant challenges to start her own business, the gesture seemed completely natural. There was no calculation in her kindness, no sense that she was performing for an audience. The cameras captured these moments, but they felt authentic rather than staged. The contrast became even more apparent when both women found themselves in conversation with a group of teenage entrepreneurs. Camilla engaged with polite interest, asking appropriate questions about their ventures and offering encouragement. Her responses were perfectly correct, showing her years of training in royal protocol. But Catherine's approach was different entirely. She asked about the obstacles they had faced, wanted to know about their family's reactions to their business ideas, and showed genuine curiosity about the technical aspects of their innovations. Charles watched these exchanges from across the room, feeling a strange mixture of admiration and uncertainty. Both women had their strengths, both brought valuable qualities to royal life. But as the evening progressed, he began to see something that had been building in his subconscious for months. The palace staff moved efficiently around the edges of the gathering, ensuring that glasses remained filled and canapes circulated smoothly. Charles noticed how Catherine acknowledged their service with quiet thank yous and genuine smiles, while Camilla, despite her kindness, maintained the slight distance that years of aristocratic upbringing had ingrained in her behavior. When the formal speeches began, Charles took his position at the podium to address the gathering. His words about young people's potential and the importance of providing opportunities for growth came from the heart. But as he spoke, he found his gaze moving between the two women who had shaped so much of his recent thinking about the future. The evening's program included presentations from several young entrepreneurs who had built successful businesses with help from the Prince's Trust. As each young person took the microphone to share their story, Charles noticed how differently his companions responded. Camilla listened with appropriate attention, applauding at the right moments and maintaining perfect composure. Catherine, however, seemed genuinely moved by their struggles and achievements, her emotions clearly visible on her face. During one particularly touching presentation, from a young man who had overcome homelessness to start a construction company, Charles saw tears in Catherine's eyes. She made no effort to hide her reaction, and somehow this authenticity made her more regal rather than less so. The cameras captured the moment, and Charles realized that this image would resonate with people in ways that perfectly composed royal appearances never could. As the formal program concluded, and guests began to mingle again, Charles found himself at a crossroads that went far beyond personal preference. This wasn't simply about choosing between two women he cared about. It was about choosing the direction he wanted the monarchy to take in the coming decades. The conversations around him continued, filled with praise for the evening's success and appreciation for the royal family's ongoing support of youth development programs. But Charles barely heard the words. His mind was racing through implications and possibilities, weighing personal happiness against public duty, tradition against innovation, when a young photographer approached to request a group photo with some of the evening's honorees. Both Camilla and Catherine stepped forward to participate. The moment crystallized something in Charles's mind. Camilla positioned herself according to protocol, her experience evident in how she found exactly the right spot to complement the composition. Catherine simply moved toward the group with natural ease, ending up surrounded by the young people in a way that suggested warmth and accessibility. The flash went off, capturing a moment that Charles knew would be studied and analyzed in newspapers around the world. But for him, it captured something more personal and more profound. It showed him two different visions of what royal life could become, two different approaches to connecting with the people they were meant to serve. As the evening drew toward its close, Charles realized that the decision he had been avoiding could no longer be postponed. The choice he made in the coming days would echo through generations, shaping not just his own life but the future of the institution he would one day lead. The morning after the charity gala brought an unusual stillness to Clarence House. Prince Charles sat in his private study, surrounded by newspapers that chronicled the previous evening's success. The headlines praised the event, but the photographs told a more complex story. In image after image, the contrast between his two companions was impossible to ignore. His private secretary knocked gently before entering with the day's correspondence. Among the letters was a particularly heavy envelope bearing the seal of his mother, Queen Elizabeth. Charles opened it with careful fingers, knowing that whatever lay inside would carry significant weight. The Queen's handwriting, still precise despite her advancing years, filled 2 pages with observations about the monarchy's evolving relationship with the British people. The letter didn't mention names, but its meaning was clear. The Queen had noticed the public's reaction to Catherine's growing presence in royal circles. Her Majesty's words spoke of duty, of the monarchy's need to remain relevant while maintaining its dignity, of the delicate balance between personal happiness and institutional responsibility. She reminded her son that every choice made by the heir to the throne would ripple through history. As Charles read these carefully chosen words, he reflected on his own journey to this moment. His relationship with Camilla had deep roots, stretching back to their youth when both had been free to follow their hearts without considering constitutional implications. She understood his passions and eccentricities in ways that few people ever could. Their shared love of literature, their similar views on environmental conservation, and their comfortable companionship had sustained them through decades of public scrutiny. But the world had changed dramatically since those early days. The British people, particularly the younger generation, expected their royals to be accessible, relatable, and genuinely engaged with modern life. The formal distance that had once been considered proper now sometimes appeared cold or out of touch. Catherine represented something different, a connection to ordinary life that the monarchy desperately needed. A soft knock interrupted his thoughts. Catherine had arrived for their scheduled meeting about upcoming charity commitments. She entered with her characteristic blend of confidence and humility, carrying a folder of research she had compiled on youth mental health initiatives. Her preparation was thorough, showing not just good intentions but the kind of serious commitment that royal duties required. As they discussed potential projects, Charles found himself impressed once again by her approach to royal responsibilities. She didn't simply want to lend her name to worthy causes. She wanted to understand the issues deeply enough to make a real difference. Her questions about funding mechanisms, outcome measurements, and long-term sustainability showed a mind that grasped both the potential and the limitations of royal influence. Their conversation was interrupted by another visitor. Camilla arrived as scheduled to discuss arrangements for an upcoming environmental conference. Her presence immediately shifted the dynamic in the room. She greeted Catherine with polite warmth, but there was an undercurrent of tension that all three recognized but none acknowledged directly. As the two women discussed their respective commitments, Charles observed the subtle differences in their approaches. Camilla's experience showed in her sophisticated understanding of political nuances and her ability to navigate complex diplomatic situations. She knew which ministers to consult, which organizations carried real influence, and how to build coalitions that could actually accomplish meaningful change. Catherine's strength lay in a different direction. Her background in art history and museum work had taught her to research thoroughly and communicate complex ideas clearly. More importantly, her recent years in royal life had shown her ability to connect with people across all social boundaries. She asked questions that others might consider too basic, but her genuine curiosity often led to insights that more experienced observers missed. The meeting progressed through various agenda items, but Charles felt the weight of unspoken questions filling the room. Both women were intelligent enough to understand the broader implications of their current situation. This wasn't simply about coordinating schedules or dividing charitable responsibilities. It was about the future structure of the royal family. When the formal business concluded, Camilla excused herself to prepare for another engagement. Catherine remained behind, ostensibly to review some final details about the mental health initiative, but Charles sensed she wanted to address the elephant in the room. Her approach was characteristically direct but tactful. She acknowledged the difficult position that Charles faced, the competing loyalties and expectations that pulled him in different directions. She spoke about her own commitment to royal service, but also about her understanding that personal happiness and public duty sometimes created impossible choices. What struck Charles most forcefully was her complete absence of jealousy or resentment toward Camilla. Instead, Catherine expressed genuine respect for the older woman's experience and dedication. This maturity, this ability to see beyond personal interest to the larger picture, reinforced his growing conviction that Catherine possessed the qualities needed for the challenges ahead. As afternoon faded into evening, Charles found himself walking through the gardens of Clarence House. The careful landscaping reflected his own passion for horticulture, but today he barely noticed the precisely arranged flower beds. His mind was wrestling with a decision that would affect not just his own life, but the lives of everyone connected to the royal family. The weight of history pressed down on him as he considered the precedents set by previous generations. His great-uncle Edward VIII had chosen love over duty, creating a constitutional crisis that still echoed through royal protocol decades later. His own parents had demonstrated the importance of putting institutional stability above personal preference, maintaining their marriage despite well-documented personal difficulties. But perhaps this situation was different. Perhaps choosing Catherine wouldn't represent a rejection of duty, but rather a recognition of how duty itself had evolved. The monarchy's survival depended on its ability to remain relevant to contemporary life, and Catherine's natural ability to bridge different worlds might be exactly what the institution needed. As darkness fell over London, Charles returned to his study to find another letter waiting for him. This one came from his son William, written in the direct style that characterized all of the younger prince's communications. William's words were supportive but challenging, urging his father to make a decision that would position the monarchy for success in the 21st century. The evening concluded with a phone call from a trusted advisor who had served the royal family for decades. Their conversation touched on polling data, media analysis, and constitutional considerations. The technical aspects of the decision were important, but Charles realized that ultimately this choice would have to come from a deeper place than political calculation. Standing at his window, overlooking the garden where he had spent so many hours in contemplation, Charles felt the weight of the moment settling around him like a heavy cloak. Tomorrow would bring new responsibilities, new challenges, and new opportunities to serve his future subjects. But tonight he had to choose which path would lead to that tomorrow. The following morning brought an unexpected summons to Windsor Castle. Queen Elizabeth had requested a private meeting with her son, and the tone of the message suggested urgency. As Charles drove through the familiar countryside toward Windsor, he reflected on the countless conversations he had shared with his mother over the years about duty, responsibility, and the sacrifices required by royal life. The Queen received him in her private sitting room, a space that had witnessed some of the most important decisions in modern British history. Family photographs lined the mantelpieces, showing generations of royals who had faced their own difficult choices. The late Prince Philip's chair remained in its usual position, a reminder of partnerships that had sustained the monarchy. Through decades of change, Her Majesty's words were measured and carefully chosen, but their impact was profound. She spoke about the letters that arrived daily at Buckingham Palace, written by ordinary people who looked to the royal family for stability and inspiration. The Queen described her observations of public sentiment, the subtle shifts in how different generations viewed the monarchy's role in contemporary society. What surprised Charles most was his mother's acknowledgement of the changing nature of royal duty itself. The Queen, who had dedicated her entire life to maintaining traditional standards and protocols, now spoke about the need for adaptation. She didn't explicitly endorse any particular course of action, but her words suggested a recognition that the monarchy's survival might require departures from established patterns. Their conversation was interrupted by the arrival of Princess Anne, who had driven over from Gatcombe Park for what appeared to be a prearranged meeting. Anne's practical nature and direct communication style had always made her one of Charles's most trusted advisors within the family. She wasted no time in addressing the situation that had brought them together. Anne's perspective was characteristically blunt but insightful. She pointed out that the royal family's recent difficulties had largely stemmed from attempts to maintain facades that no longer matched reality. The public, she argued, had shown remarkable willingness to accept human complexity and genuine emotion from their royals, but they had little patience for pretense or calculated image management. The discussion that followed was unlike any royal family meeting in recent memory. Instead of focusing on protocol and precedent, they examined the monarchy's fundamental purpose in modern society. Anne argued that the institution's strength had always come from its ability to reflect the best aspirations of the British people while providing continuity during periods of change. As the afternoon progressed, other family members joined the conversation. Prince Edward arrived with his wife Sophie, both bringing perspectives shaped by their own experiences of building successful royal careers. While maintaining genuine personal relationships, their marriage had demonstrated that it was possible to find happiness within the constraints of royal duty, but they emphasized that such success required careful consideration of compatibility and shared values. The conversation eventually turned to specific considerations about both Camilla and Catherine. The family members spoke with respect and affection about Camilla's dedication and service, acknowledging her significant contributions to royal life. But they also recognized the unique qualities that Catherine brought to her role, particularly her ability to connect with younger generations and her authentic approach to charitable work. What emerged from these discussions was a recognition that the choice Charles faced wasn't simply about personal preference or even about which woman would make him happier. The decision would fundamentally shape how the monarchy evolved in the coming decades, influencing everything from public perception to charitable effectiveness to international relationships. As evening approached, Charles found himself alone with his mother for the first time since the meeting began. The Queen's final words to him carried the weight of 7 decades of royal service. She reminded him that every monarch and heir had faced moments when personal desires and public duty seemed to conflict. But the greatest leaders had found ways to align these forces rather than choosing between them. The drive back to London gave Charles time to process the day's conversations. The support of his family was important, but he recognized that the final decision had to be his alone. As he navigated the familiar roads, he thought about the different futures that each choice would create. Not just for himself, but for everyone whose lives would be affected by his decision. That evening, Charles attended a small dinner party hosted by close friends. The gathering was deliberately informal, designed to provide a respite from the pressures he had been facing. But even in this relaxed setting, he found himself observing how the other couples interacted, studying the dynamics that made some partnerships stronger and more effective than others. One conversation particularly struck him. An older couple, married for nearly 40 years, spoke about the evolution of their relationship over time. They described how their different strengths had complemented each other, creating a partnership that was more effective than either could have been alone. But they also acknowledged that some of their early assumptions about compatibility had proven incorrect, and their success had required constant adaptation and compromise. As the evening wound down, Charles received a text message that changed everything. Catherine had been involved in a minor car accident while returning from a charity event. She wasn't seriously injured, but the incident had shaken her enough that she had asked if he could visit her at her apartment to discuss some concerns about her future role in royal life. The drive across London felt endless, filled with worry about Catherine's condition and curiosity about what she wanted to discuss. When he arrived at her apartment, he found her sitting quietly with a cup of tea, looking thoughtful rather than distressed. The accident had been minor, but it had apparently triggered some deeper reflections about the path her life was taking. Catherine's words surprised him with their directness and maturity. She spoke about her growing understanding of what royal life truly demanded, not just in terms of public appearances and charitable work, but in terms of personal sacrifice and constant scrutiny. She had been thinking seriously about whether she was truly prepared for such a life, and whether her presence in his world was helping or hindering his own responsibilities. What moved Charles most was her complete focus on his well-being and the monarchy's needs rather than her own interests. She acknowledged that she had feelings for him, but she also recognized the complexity of his situation and the weight of the decision he faced. Her willingness to step aside if that would be better for everyone involved demonstrated a selflessness that reminded him of the royal family's highest traditions. As they talked late into the night, Charles felt something shifting in his understanding of the choice before him. This wasn't about choosing between two good options. It was about recognizing which path would best serve all the people and institutions he was committed to protecting. Catherine's grace under pressure, her genuine concern for others, and her clear-eyed assessment of royal responsibilities had shown him something crucial about her character. When he finally left her apartment in the early hours of the morning, Charles knew that the time for deliberation was over. The decision that had seemed so difficult now felt inevitable, shaped not by calculation or outside pressure, but by a clear recognition of what the future required. The decision, once made, brought an unexpected sense of clarity to Prince Charles's mind. The following morning found him in his study earlier than usual, preparing for what he knew would be one of the most difficult conversations of his life. He had asked Camilla to join him for a private meeting, ostensibly to discuss upcoming engagements, but really to address the future of their relationship. Camilla arrived at Clarence House with her usual grace and sophistication, carrying herself with the dignity that had sustained her through decades of public scrutiny. She had always possessed an intuitive understanding of unspoken communications, and Charles suspected she sensed the gravity of today's meeting before he spoke a single word. They began with mundane discussions about their shared calendar, reviewing upcoming charity events and official functions. But as the conversation progressed, Charles found himself struggling to transition to the more personal matters that needed to be addressed. Camilla, with her characteristic directness, eventually broached the subject herself. Her words surprised him with their understanding and acceptance. Camilla had been observing the same changes that Charles had noticed, watching how Catherine's natural approach to royal duties resonated with the public in ways that more traditional methods sometimes failed to achieve. She spoke without bitterness about the evolution of the monarchy's needs and her own recognition that personal happiness sometimes required sacrificing what one wanted most. What made the conversation even more poignant was Camilla's genuine affection for Catherine as an individual. She praised the younger woman's dedication, her authentic concern for the causes she supported, and her ability to bring fresh perspectives to long-standing challenges. This generosity of spirit, even in the face of personal disappointment, reminded Charles why he had cared for Camilla so deeply for so many years. Their discussion extended well into the afternoon, covering not just the immediate implications of Charles's decision, but also the practical arrangements that would need to be made. Camilla's continued involvement in various charitable organizations was important to her sense of purpose, and Charles wanted to ensure that her royal duties could continue in a way that honored her contributions while acknowledging the new reality of their relationship. As evening approached, Camilla prepared to leave Clarence's house for what both knew would be the last time as Charles's primary companion. Her final words to him carried no trace of resentment or regret. Instead, she spoke about her hopes for his happiness and her confidence that he was making the right choice for the monarchy's future. The grace with which she handled this transition would remain one of Charles's most treasured memories of their time together. That night, Charles called Catherine to request a meeting the following day. His voice carried a formality that she hadn't heard before, and she agreed to the meeting with a slight tremor in her response that suggested she understood the significance of his request. The next morning brought unseasonably warm weather to London, and Charles chose to meet Catherine in the gardens of Kensington Palace rather than in a formal indoor setting. The location seemed appropriate for a conversation that would shape both of their futures, surrounded by the history of previous generations who had faced their own moments of decision. Catherine arrived wearing a simple blue dress that complemented the spring flowers beginning to bloom around them. Her composure was perfect, but Charles could see the tension in her shoulders and the careful way she held herself. As if preparing for either wonderful news or devastating disappointment, Charles began by thanking her for her patience during the difficult period. When he had been weighing his options, he spoke about the complexity of royal duty and the challenge of balancing personal desires with public responsibilities. Catherine listened without interruption, her expression showing both understanding and sympathy for the position he had been in. When Charles finally revealed his decision, the effect was immediate and profound. Catherine's carefully maintained composure dissolved into tears of relief and joy, but even in this moment of intense emotion, she managed to express concern for Camilla's feelings and appreciation for the older woman's gracious handling of the situation. The conversation that followed was unlike any Charles had experienced in his royal life. Catherine's questions weren't about titles, ceremonies, or privileges, but about how she could most effectively serve the British people and support the institutions she would be joining. Her focus remained consistently on the responsibilities rather than the rewards of royal life. They spent hours walking through the gardens, discussing everything from charitable priorities to family relationships to the practical challenges of living under constant public scrutiny. Catherine's thoughtful responses to each topic reinforced Charles's conviction that he had made the right choice. But they also reminded him of the enormous adjustments that lay ahead for both of them. As news of Charles's decision began to circulate through royal circles, the reactions were swift and varied. His immediate family expressed support and relief that a difficult period of uncertainty had finally been resolved. Palace staff, with their characteristic discretion, began making the subtle adjustments necessary to reflect the new arrangements without creating unnecessary drama or publicity. The public response, when it came, exceeded everyone's expectations. The announcement was carefully crafted to emphasize continuity and respect for all parties involved. But the underlying message was clear: the heir to the throne had chosen a path that aligned with contemporary values while honoring traditional responsibilities. Catherine's first official appearance following the announcement took place at a children's hospital in East London. The choice of venue was deliberate, reflecting her commitment to causes that directly improved people's lives. Her interaction with the young Patients and their families showed no trace of the nervousness that might have been expected from someone suddenly thrust into such intense public attention. Charles watched from a distance as Catherine moved through the hospital wards, struck by how naturally she adapted to the increased security, presence, and media attention without losing the authentic warmth that had first attracted his notice. The children responded to her with immediate trust, and their parents seemed genuinely moved by her obvious concern for their families' well-being. When Catherine emerged from the hospital, she was surrounded by a crowd of well-wishers and reporters. Her brief comments to the media struck exactly the right tone, acknowledging the honor of her new role while emphasizing her commitment to learning and serving effectively. The photographers captured images of a woman who appeared both confident and humble, ready to embrace royal duty while maintaining her essential humanity. That evening, Charles and Catherine attended their first official function together as the newly confirmed future of the royal family. The event was a reception for Commonwealth representatives, chosen specifically to emphasize the international dimensions of royal responsibility. Catherine's preparation for the evening had been thorough, and her conversations with delegates from various nations showed both genuine interest and impressive knowledge of their country's current challenges. As the evening progressed, Charles observed the subtle ways that Catherine was already changing the dynamics of royal engagements. Her questions to the Commonwealth representatives went beyond polite pleasantries to explore substantive issues like climate change, economic development, and youth education. Her approach seemed to inspire more meaningful discussions than the traditional format of such events typically generated. The evening concluded with a private moment between Charles and Catherine on a balcony overlooking the Thames. As they stood together watching the lights of London spread out below them, both understood that their individual lives had just merged into something larger and more significant than either could have achieved alone. The weeks following Charles's decision brought a whirlwind of activity as the royal household adjusted to its new reality. Catherine moved through this period with remarkable composure, but those closest to her could see the enormous effort required to maintain her calm exterior while absorbing the fundamental changes occurring in every aspect of her life. First major challenge came sooner than expected. A constitutional crisis in a Commonwealth nation required immediate diplomatic attention, and Catherine found herself accompanying Charles on her first official overseas visit in her new role. The trip would be scrutinized intensely, not just by British media but by international observers eager to assess the monarchy's evolving character. The flight to Australia provided Charles and Catherine with their first extended private time since the announcement of their future together. Away from the constant demands of public appearances and official duties, they were able to discuss their hopes and concerns about the path they were embarking on together. Catherine's questions revealed both her serious commitment to her new responsibilities and her realistic understanding of the challenges ahead. Upon arrival in Sydney, the crowds that greeted them exceeded all expectations. Thousands of people lined the route from the airport, many carrying signs expressing support for Catherine and excitement about the royal family's future direction. The enthusiasm was particularly notable among younger Australians, suggesting that Charles's choice had indeed resonated with the demographic groups the monarchy most needed to engage. Catherine's first major solo engagement took place at a youth center in Melbourne, where she met with teenagers who had overcome significant personal challenges to pursue education and career goals. Her preparation for the visit had been exhaustive, including detailed briefings on Australian social issues and the specific programs she would be observing. What impressed the local organizers most was Catherine's ability to move beyond the prepared talking points to engage in genuinely meaningful conversations with the young people she met. She asked detailed questions about their experiences, showed real interest in their future plans, and demonstrated an understanding of the systemic issues that affected their communities. The media coverage of Catherine's Australian appearances was overwhelmingly positive, but more importantly, The feedback from the organizations she visited suggested that her involvement had generated genuine momentum for their causes. Several youth programs reported increased volunteer applications and donation commitments following her visits, indicating that her influence extended far beyond ceremonial support. Charles observed these developments with a mixture of pride and relief. His decision to choose Catherine was being validated not through political calculations or media management, but through tangible improvements in the effectiveness of royal charitable work. The monarchy's capacity to generate positive change was being enhanced by Catherine's natural ability to connect with people and causes. The trip's defining moment came during a visit to a remote Aboriginal community, where Catherine and Charles were invited to participate in traditional ceremonies that had special significance for the local people. Catherine's respectful participation in these cultural exchanges, combined with her obvious efforts to understand their historical and contemporary significance, created powerful images that resonated far beyond Australia's borders when they returned to London. The transformation in public perception was unmistakable. Opinion polls showed increased support for the monarchy across all age groups, with particularly strong approval among women and younger voters. More significantly, there was measurable growth in interest in the charitable organizations that Catherine had highlighted. During the trip, the success of the Australian visit led to increased requests for Catherine's involvement in various initiatives. Her private secretary, recently appointed to help manage her growing responsibilities, reported that invitations were arriving at an unprecedented rate. The challenge became selecting engagements that would allow Catherine to have maximum impact while avoiding the overexposure that could diminish her effectiveness. Catherine's approach to this challenge revealed another aspect of her character that Charles found particularly admirable. Rather than simply accepting the most prestigious invitations, she insisted on thorough research into each organization's track record and actual impact. She wanted to ensure that her time and the attention her presence generated would translate into meaningful benefits for the causes she supported. This careful curation of her public role extended to her relationship with the media. Catherine worked with experienced royal communications staff to develop an approach that provided adequate access for legitimate news coverage while protecting the privacy necessary for her to develop genuine relationships with the organizations she supported. The personal dimension of Catherine and Charles's relationship continued to evolve. Alongside these public developments, they discovered shared interests that went beyond their common commitment to charitable work, finding mutual enjoyment in art exhibitions, classical music, and quiet evenings devoted to reading and discussion. Their different backgrounds, rather than creating barriers, seemed to enrich their understanding of contemporary British society. Catherine's middle-class upbringing and professional experience provided perspectives that complemented Charles's aristocratic worldview, creating a partnership that could relate to a broader range of people than either could have reached alone. The royal family's response to Catherine's integration into their circles was uniformly positive. Queen Elizabeth, in particular, seemed pleased by Catherine's respectful approach to royal traditions, combined with her innovative ideas for increasing the monarchy's relevance to modern life. The Queen's approval, while never explicitly stated, was evident in her inclusion of Catherine in increasingly important family discussions about the future. Prince William and Catherine. Kate's established friendship deepened into genuine partnership as they collaborated on various charitable initiatives. Their shared commitment to mental health awareness, environmental protection, and youth development created natural opportunities for joint projects that maximized their collective impact. The broader palace staff, from senior advisors to household employees, adapted to Catherine's presence with remarkable smoothness. Her genuine appreciation for their work and her natural courtesy created positive working relationships that made everyone's jobs more pleasant and effective. As autumn approached, Catherine faced her first major test as a senior member of the royal family. The annual state opening of Parliament would require her to participate in one of the monarchy's most formal and traditional ceremonies. With every detail of her appearance and behavior subject to intense scrutiny, her preparation for this event was meticulous, involving multiple rehearsals and consultations with protocol experts who had overseen previous state ceremonies. But beyond the technical requirements, Catherine understood that this appearance would symbolize her complete integration into the royal family's constitutional role. The ceremony itself proceeded flawlessly, with Catherine's presence adding a sense of renewed energy and relevance to the ancient ritual. Her obvious comfort with the formal requirements, combined with her natural dignity, created images that would define public perception of the monarchy's evolution for years to come. As the carriage procession returned to Buckingham Palace following the ceremony, Charles reflected on how much had changed since that charity gala where he had first recognized the choice he needed to make. The decision that had seemed so difficult at the time now appeared to have been inevitable, guided by forces larger than personal preference or political calculation. The first anniversary of Charles's decision arrived with little fanfare, marked not by public celebrations but by a quiet recognition of how profoundly the royal family had transformed over the preceding 12 months. Catherine had evolved from a newcomer learning royal protocols to a confident and effective senior member of the family, her influence evident in everything from increased charitable donations to improved public opinion ratings. The morning brought a private family gathering at Windsor Castle, where Queen Elizabeth hosted an intimate lunch for the core members of the royal family. The occasion provided an opportunity to reflect on the changes of the past year and to discuss plans for the future. Catherine's integration into these family discussions had become so natural that newer staff members might have assumed she had always been part of these conversations. During the lunch, Princess Anne raised a toast acknowledging Catherine's contributions to the royal family's work over the past year. The statistics were impressive. Charitable organizations associated with Catherine had seen average increases in donations of 30%. Volunteer applications had risen by 45%, and media coverage of royal charitable activities had become notably more substantive and less focused on mere celebrity appearances. But beyond the measurable impacts, there were subtler changes that perhaps mattered even more. The royal family's engagement calendar had evolved to include more direct interaction with ordinary citizens and fewer purely ceremonial appearances. Catherine's influence had encouraged other family members to adopt similar approaches, creating an overall shift toward more meaningful public service. The conversation at lunch inevitably turned to future challenges and opportunities. Brexit negotiations were creating new demands for royal diplomacy, requiring careful navigation of complex international relationships. Climate change was generating increasing public concern, creating opportunities for the royal family to demonstrate leadership on environmental issues. Social inequality remained a persistent concern, demanding innovative approaches to charitable work and public engagement. Catherine's contributions to these discussions revealed how much she had learned about the constitutional and political dimensions of royal responsibilities. Her questions were informed and thoughtful, showing deep understanding of both domestic and international issues. More importantly, her suggestions consistently focused on practical ways the royal family could have positive impact rather than merely symbolic gestures. After lunch, Charles and Catherine took a private walk through the Windsor grounds, following paths that had witnessed centuries of royal conversations about duty, responsibility, and the future. Their discussion touched on personal matters as well as public concerns, covering everything from their growing comfort with each other to their shared vision for the monarchy's evolution. Catherine's perspective on their first year together was characteristically honest and thoughtful. She acknowledged the immense learning curve she had navigated, the moments of uncertainty and occasional overwhelm, but also her growing confidence in her ability to make meaningful contributions to royal life. Her assessment of her own performance was both self-critical and realistic, showing the kind of honest self-reflection that Charles had come to value deeply. As they walked, Charles shared his own observations about how their partnership had exceeded his hopes and expectations. Catherine's influence had extended far beyond her own activities to affect the entire royal family's approach to their work. Her emphasis on measurable impact and genuine engagement had challenged long-standing assumptions about how royal duties should be performed. The afternoon brought a series of private meetings with senior palace staff to review the year's achievements and plan for upcoming challenges. These sessions revealed the extent to which Catherine had become integrated into the royal household's decision-making processes. Her opinions were sought on everything from scheduling decisions to charitable partnerships, and her input was clearly valued by experienced advisors who had initially been uncertain about her qualifications. One particularly significant discussion focused on the royal family's response to a recent natural disaster that had affected several Commonwealth nations. Catherine's suggestion that the family organize a coordinated relief effort, combining traditional royal patronage with modern fundraising techniques and direct service projects, had generated unprecedented results. The initiative had not only raised substantial funds but had also strengthened relationships with Commonwealth governments and demonstrated the monarchy's continued relevance in addressing contemporary challenges. The evening concluded with a formal dinner at Buckingham Palace, attended by government ministers, charitable leaders, and international dignitaries. The guest list represented the broad range of relationships that the royal family maintained, from domestic political figures to foreign diplomats to leaders of major charitable organizations. Catherine's presence at this dinner marked a significant milestone in her royal journey. A year earlier, she would have been carefully coached on every interaction and monitored closely by experienced staff. Tonight, she moved through the gathering with complete confidence, engaging in substantive conversations about policy issues, international relations, and charitable work without any need for guidance or support. Charles watched these interactions with satisfaction and pride, but also with recognition of how much their relationship had evolved. What had begun as a choice between two different approaches to royal duty had developed into a genuine partnership based on shared values and complementary strengths. Catherine's influence on his own approach to royal responsibilities had been as significant as his mentoring of her transition into royal life. The evening's conversations revealed another important development. Several government ministers and charitable leaders specifically mentioned the positive changes they had observed in the royal family's engagement with their work. The monarchy's influence was being exercised more effectively, generating better outcomes for the causes and institutions it supported. As the dinner wound down, Charles found himself reflecting on the moment exactly 1 year earlier when he had faced the choice that had seemed so difficult at the time. The silence that had crashed across that room when he chose Catherine's hand over Camillas had been filled by 12 months of validation for his decision. The choice had proven to be about much more than personal preference or even compatibility. It had been about recognizing the direction the monarchy needed to move to remain relevant and effective in the 21st century. Catherine's natural approach to royal duties had provided a template for evolution that honored tradition while embracing necessary change. The guests began departing as midnight approached, leaving Charles and Catherine alone in the state dining room where so many important royal decisions had been celebrated or mourned over the centuries. As they stood together among the portraits of previous monarchs and their consorts, both understood that their own chapter in royal history was just beginning. Catherine's final words of the evening captured perfectly the spirit that had made their partnership so successful. She spoke not about personal happiness or achievement, but about the opportunities and responsibilities that lay ahead. Her focus remained consistently on service, on the difference they could make together in addressing the challenges facing their future subjects. As they walked together through the corridors of Buckingham Palace toward their private quarters, Charles reflected on how completely his life had been transformed by a single moment of decision. The choice that had seemed to require choosing between duty and desire had instead revealed that the two could be perfectly aligned when, guided by clear vision and genuine commitment to service. The silence that had followed his choice of Catherine's hand had been replaced by a year of affirmation, growth, and achievement that exceeded everyone's expectations. But more importantly, It had been replaced by a partnership that promised to strengthen the monarchy for generations to come. Standing at the window of his study overlooking the palace gardens where he had made his final decision 12 months earlier, Charles felt the deep satisfaction that comes from making a choice that serves something larger than oneself. The future stretched ahead, full of challenges and opportunities, but he faced it with confidence born of a year spent watching his decision vindicated by its results. The room remained silent except for the gentle ticking of the ancient clock that had marked time through so many royal generations. But this silence was different from the one that had followed his choice. This was the silence of certainty, of peace, of a decision that had proven itself through its consequences. In choosing Catherine's hand, Charles had chosen not just a partner, but a path toward a future that honored both tradition and transformation.